the biggest takeaway that I've got is that I have, and we have got to be a lot better at speeding up government, speeding up government in the decisions that it makes, speeding up government in the data that it makes available, adding real-time capabilities to data.gov. I took a long list of things that I want to get done, but a lot of them have to do with speeding up government. In order to speed up government, we need to do something which is very hard to talk about without falling into like very tired kind of consultant speak cliches about changing culture. But I listened to Carl's call to action this morning, and I listened to Julius's note about public service, and I've also heard, and I should say I've made like a long list of ideas for data and services, machine-readable data, services that the federal government can make available to people. And I just want to make this note, which is that no amount of online machine-readable data is going to make the government innovative. It's going to make the government cheaper, faster, more effective, all the things that we're trying to achieve. What it requires is for people to think about things in a very different way. And there's a role for people in the outside, people who are not government employees. In fact, it's a critical role. And if you'll forgive me for, invoking, kind of a hero figure, but you can turn around President Kennedy's call from 1961 and say, ask what machine-readable data code and web services your country can give to you, and ask what data, machine-readable data, mashups, code, and web services you can give to your country. That is an inherent, intrinsic, fundamentally important joint activity that is absolutely essential if we're going to change the way that the government works. It can't be the case that we simply wait for the waves of retirement to produce a swap out of the federal workforce with people that have grown up in a web environment. We've got to work together collaboratively.
Yeah, actually, there's one thing that if I can just jump in with one of my takeaways, I saw an amazing amount of innovation, particularly on Tuesday when we showed at the showcase. We had a lot of presentations from state and local governments, and it occurred to me that one of the things that we really need to do is get better at reuse. Hal Varian talked about the virtue of having 50 different experiments at states and perhaps 18,000 experiments at individual level, but boy, we need to also, once we know what works, we need to figure out how to share that better. For example, Utah.gov, what can they teach to other states? Okta, what can they teach to DC? What can they teach to San Francisco or New York? And we really need to figure out how to create that information sharing. I don't know whether the White House plays any role in that.
Well, one thing
the federal government.
Yeah, one thing you can do is model good behavior.
Yeah.
Right? You can make sure that the code that you're commissioning, the code that you are, paying taxpayer dollars for, where possible, is being made available for other people to reuse.
So kind of a government app store, if you like, where other governments can consume, applications that other departments or whatever make.
That's absolutely right. If you think about what Casey from GSA said about the cloud strategy, you're much more likely to be effective in a complicated bureaucratic environment if you pursue a honeypot strategy where you build something that nobody's required to use but is just so freakishly useful that people will gravitate towards it. So, a cloud for web-based services seems like a very obvious place to start because there's no reason for everybody to be running their own web services if they can simply use shared infrastructure, commodity infrastructure.
Right. So I took you off your list. Sorry, I wanted
to.
And
so let me get to my list here. I want to say that just to give you a flavor of I've been there for 2 months. So for the last 2 months, a tremendous amount of my time has been spent in interagency meetings where I find myself basically trying to explain a metaphor. The consultants would say it's a paradigm shift, but it's really a metaphor and a kind of a transition from an old model to a new model. And again, this I think will be very familiar to everybody in the room, but it's essentially from the telephone system to the internet. So it's a transition from closed systems to open, from channels to layers. from controlled to distributed, from proprietary to standards-based, from hardened systems to resilient systems. Just to give you two examples, we've been talking a lot about the evolution of the air traffic control system. So, right now, we're still dealing with essentially 1930s, 1940s radio technologies that airplanes use to talk to towers and then do handoff. And a much better air traffic control system would be one where planes are like packets. They're autonomous. They can route themselves in the most direct route. They can use a multiplicity of channels, different ways, to communicate with satellites, ground stations, planes talking to each other directly. Another example would be emergency responders. You want your police and fire people to not have to ever depend on any one network to provide their communications. They need to be able to talk to each other directly, talk to towers, talk to multiple different, through multiple different channels. And so, there's this interesting question, which is, can the government move from being a kind of a core-based system, a mainframe system, or a PSTN, SS7 switch kind of system, to one whose whole mission is to empower the edge, at least with regard to data and information. So anyway, let me give you three very quick things that I pulled out as sort of like to-dos on my to-do list soon. So one that came out of a number of different conversations that I've had, and this is not a new or kind of brilliant idea, but it's one that the urgency of which was kind of reinforced on me, and that is every federal employee should have a searchable homepage on a government intranet that makes it possible to find expertise, what people are working on, easily set up mailing lists around areas of expertise and common endeavor. Right now, it takes me forever to try to find somebody in a different department because I have to go and find, an official contact who will then look up in their directory. And I'll tell you just by way of illustrative example, I sent an email to a line employee in a federal department that was responsible for running a web server, and I asked, could I get a briefing on their surge capacity planning? And I've done this for a couple of different websites that strike me as potential targets for significant, influxes of attention. And if those
traffic
of you
spikes.
Yeah, traffic spikes. And those of you that paid attention to H1N1, the UK launched a website that went down for a couple of hours because they got 7 million, queries in an hour. And I just don't want that to happen. So, but I also got then chewed out for not having gone to the 7 layers above to ask a formal thing, and they could vet the answer and get it, Anyway, it's insane. and if you could easily find and search and find other people in other departments, I think that would be a good thing. Realtimedata.gov. After listening to the Every Block, Outside In, I Live At, presentations and hearing about them, providing a reliable supply of real-time location-relevant data is a clear priority. Serverizing data, in the words of Jack Dangermond. The third one is I'm really committed to Virtual USA. I love that that's happening. I hadn't really focused on that before this conference. We're seeing, if you look at the DC App Store that just got launched, most of the applications there are geo-related. The power of that data is clear. So helping the DHS's, tech and science director to make that happen. And then the last one that I'll mention is maybe you could call this sort of like Carl.gov. I mean, listening to Carl's speech this morning, gave me this sort of mixture of inspiration and mixed in with a little bit of shame. Thinking about all the things that we're not doing that are sort of clearly obvious to me that the federal government should be doing. They're not hard. They involve, the idea that things which have the force of law are not freely available to everybody who lives in the country is just, appalling. And so I think my personal final commitment is going to be my personal kind of Carl.gov project, which is to try to use the White House's, moral authority, convening power, and maybe even some more direct sorts of powers to try to get data out into the open where it belongs.
Well, that sounds like a good list of takeaways. So I wanted to return very briefly to this idea of the idea that a lot of the experiments are going on locally, and the idea that we need to propagate the best local experiments so that those best practices can be shared. In that regard, it seems to me that Gov2O is catching because one of the people who's worked with me very hard on putting this event together is Jennifer Palka from TechWeb. And in the course of the event, she came up with a brilliant new idea that actually anticipates Chairman Janikowski's call to action. And I'd like to invite Jen out to talk to us a little bit about a new program she's launching called Code for America.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes. Tell us what you're thinking.
So Code for America is really based on this observation I've had working in the Web 2 world, and I'm the co-chair for the Web 2.0 Expos and work on the Web 2 Summit, that there's an enormous amount of technical and design talent in this industry that really wants to have an impact. They're doing it in a lot of ways, like my cohort Leonard Lynn, who went to work for MyBarackObama.com, other political campaigns, and then you look at the citizen app community, people like Tim Kolbeck and all the people who've contributed to Apps for America and Apps for Democracy. These are really talented designers and developers who want to not just get people elected, but help change the world that we're in, help change government. They don't really have the means to do that right now. There's not a really useful channel for them. What they're doing in the citizen app community is great, but it's from the outside of government in. And what we want to do with Code for America is to provide a place for them to work inside government, but through a specific channel. So the idea is based on Teach for America, which allows people to teach for a year, sort of fast-tracking them into that world. Have a competitive application process so you get really top talent, connect them with people like you who can mentor them to some degree, and have them work in teams of 5 attached to a particular city that we would work with, or a couple of cities in our first year, and build a Web 2.0 app for that city that is really has a solid business case for that app defined by the city management. So the application's being requested by the city rather than sort of the discovery of it happening through the Apps for America project in that sort of model. So the outcome is a bunch of applications that cities can use that would all be open source. All other cities can use them. And over time, you build sort of an open Muni stack. But the other outcomes really are the collaboration between the team and the city, the sort of cultural virus thing that will happen of having them in there. But also, as you guys were talking about, the cities have similar problems. So getting the cities that participate in the program to talk to each other is probably, hopefully, the most significant outcome of it.
All right, this sounds like a great project. That's codeforamerica.org.
Codeforamerica.org.
And you're just really spinning it up, but we thought this was a great, even though it's not fully hatched yet, we thought this was a great opportunity to socialize the idea and to make that call for public service. For those of you out there thinking public service is going to be cool again, Jen's going to make it so.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
for having me.
Thanks very much. We wanted to finish with a riff on some ideas that came to us from Tom Khalil, who, as I told you in the opening, was the person who inspired me to do this event. Tom sent me an email in which he said, "I hope you leave people with some challenges." And he sent some notes on some challenges that he thought we should be tackling, at least sort of kind of examples of the kinds of things he wished that we would set those of you out in the world listening, those of you in the audience working on. And we've kind of done a little bit of chewing on the things that Tom wrote and want to talk about them.
All right, so I've got 3. So these are examples. They're not, there's nothing magical about these, but trying to reduce projects and ideas into concrete statements of challenge. So I've got 3 that relate to education for 3 different levels of the educational process. The first one is for young children. There is some research from 1997 or so, but I think it's still pretty valid, that says that in Beverly Hills, the average household has about 199 age-appropriate books. In the Compton neighborhood of Los Angeles, it's 2.7 age-appropriate books per household, and in Watts, it's 0.04.
Sounds like a call for some children's book publishers to make a big donation, but the internet may be another option.
That's right.
If you can't afford books, though, can you afford a net connection?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other panel.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you later on top of that, the research that vocabulary size is the best, or at least an outstanding predictor of school readiness. The challenge is, can we develop low-cost devices, applications, web services that dramatically increase the vocabulary size of children from low-income families?
I think that's great. I love that it's measurable. So we actually want to do something we will see an impact
and so
from.
Pick your measurement, but I don't know what it is. But vocabulary size for children. Number 2 is in middle school math and science. Can we create games for middle school math and science that are as engaging as World of Warcraft or Guitar Hero? And third, for
all those out there who are game designers, please take that up. I think it'd be an awesome challenge.
I was reading the average EverQuest player who is 14 spends 4.7 hours a day playing EverQuest.
That being said, maybe you learn a lot of math and science if we just worked a little bit more of that into World of Warcraft, EverQuest, and Guitar Hero. Yeah,
that's right. There's no that's right.
Might not have to be a different game. Maybe those guys could actually think about some features to add.
Yeah. All right, and then my third one is for higher education, which I tried to sort of think about, how you could express higher education online learning in some form of a challenge. So my sort of rough draft would be, develop online community college courses that improve the more that more students use them, and then achieve an increase in completion rates for online community college learning of 50%. There's a big drop-off in people who start versus people who complete.
So we're seeing a couple of key principles there. This idea of Web 2.0, things get better through activity, and then literally the measurement side. Yeah.
Yep. So those are my 3.
Okay. So from Tom's list, I really picked out some ideas around healthcare, and the wording that I got, though, actually was from a conversation with Beth Novak last night, where she said that one of her goals was to bend the cost curve in health care. You think about the way the curve has been going up, 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 and it's a really wonderful message. Could we, in fact, bend that, flatten that curve? And clearly we heard from Elliot Fisher about making outcomes part of the feedback loop that drives spending. But Tom had a couple of very specific ideas, just that we're moving towards a sensor-based world where, for example, you could imagine iPhone-based or any kind of smartphone-based nagware that reminds people to take their medications or to get exercise. I've been carrying in my pocket the Philips Direct Life device, and it says, you're at only 67% of your targeted movement today. And those kind of things really do make a difference, and we can have technology that will literally improve health outcomes. And Tom's goal was to say, could we harness these kinds of technologies to reduce systemic costs by a third? Tom also had on his wish list energy. He said, can we use advances in IT such as wireless sensor networks, building monitoring, automated controls to increase the efficiency of existing buildings by 30 to 50%? And I would just say, again, fabulous goal. Julius asked technology people to come enter public service. I would also say that it's possible to do public service in the private sector by working on stuff that matters. You can tackle these problems as an entrepreneur in the private sector. Just work on stuff that makes a difference on these world problems. And I think Tom's really onto something there. He had a list of other things. Let me just throw out a few more ideas for the entrepreneurs among you. He points out that he said we need to create online resources to make personal finance as easily understandable as MayoClinic.com does for personal health care. Significantly increase the ability of people with disabilities to participate in the workplace through advances in universal design and assistive technology. So I think there's really quite an amazing list. We're running out of time. Do you have any concluding thoughts, Andrew?
No, I just will say thanks to everybody who's been here. I learned a lot, and I've got long notes. And for those of you that have further things to pass along to me, either grab me or email me at amclaughlin@ostp.eop.gov.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for being here, and thanks for